Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
All of these political and social and economic issues are all hinged on the well-being of our planet. That made me really think, okay, if there's one thing I want to put my effort into, it is really educating and working around biology.
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now, the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Good Dirt. We have another wonderful interview for you today. We love all the different types of interviews we do here on the show, and once in a while we'll have a visual artist on. Today we have Heidi Lowell. She is a multi-disciplinary artist based in Austin, Texas. She works in multiple media, including clay and watercolor, and she strikes a balance between classical and intuitive painting. This balance between structure and freedom are imperative to her work, as she says, which is informed by both science and nature.
What first caught our attention about Heidi was that out of concern for the plastic and the toxins used in the production of so many widely available art supplies, she decided to find a way to create paints that were conducive to her health and her belief systems. So about 10 years ago, she embarked on a journey to learn everything she could about pigments and dyes, and now makes her own watercolor paints in every color of the rainbow using soil, insect-based, and plant-based pigments, and she teaches others how to do it.
Heidi's art has been shown in galleries and museums across the United States, and she has won the Best Cover Art for the Journal of Biophysics, as well as a national contest hosted by Minted and West Elm. She describes her own work as celebrating the peaceful and messy aspects of the natural world, and in doing so, she would like to encourage viewers to celebrate those same aspects in themselves.
And we'd like to add how much we appreciate and respect her passion for the natural world and her example in creating artwork that not only celebrates it, but lifts it up and exists in harmony with it. We know you'll enjoy this conversation with Heidi Lowell, coming to us from Austin, Texas.
I am Heidi Lowell, and I'm a visual artist based in Austin, Texas. I started out as an art teacher and then a watercolor artist, and now I am making my own watercolors from site-specific soils, insect, and plant pigments.
That is what's so fascinating to me.
That's super cool.
About you and what you're doing. I don't think we've ever talked to anybody that makes paints out of natural materials. This is so great.
I've certainly tried to do it, but I thought it was like made up and you can't actually. So it's really exciting that you actually do it.
I'm having a memory of I was down at the creek with a little friend. This is several years ago. I think she was 10 or 11 years old. She started showing me how the different rocks in the creek, she would rub them on the other rocks and say, look at the color of this one and look at the color of this one. And that sort of started me down this rabbit hole of, wow, how many colors are in the earth. And I already do natural dyes. I dye textiles with different plants and stuff. But to make paints, okay. I'm excited to hear about this. So you're already a visual artist. And what led you to making your own paint?
I love learning always. And I remember the first time I learned that acrylic paints are made of plastic, I was shocked. Years later, I also learned that most oil paints are made of plasticizers, and I was kind of disturbed by that. I can't help but think about what we're using and where it's going to go afterwards. So I had that in my mind, and I knew artists had made previous to all of this technology and chemicals. And then I saw a class come up, Finding Natural Pigments, at this wilderness school outside of Austin, Earth Native. And I went and took that class. It was really cool. Just like Mary, you were talking about the little girl who was finding all the different pigments. That's exactly what we did. We were out in this creek bed on their land, and they were helping us find these pigments. And that actually is how people have always found paints. We've just gotten better at refining them over time. So that's how I got started. I didn't really fully connect it into like making my own watercolors until sometime in the last 1 to 2 years. I got really like dedicated to that. And so that's just been a huge part of my practice for the last couple of years.
Sustainable art supplies.
Yeah.
So what did people paint? Like what did like Rembrandt paint with?
Yeah. So they would find pigments from the earth, and a lot of natural blues have heavy metals, which is interesting. But they mostly painted with tempera and oil paints, but the tempera was mixed with egg. And for oil, they were just mixed with literal oil. It wasn't super high tech.
So not like, obviously not petroleum oil. Like when we think of oil paints today, is it mostly like petroleum oil and that's why it's plastic? Or is it like olive oil? Like what kind of oil is it?
That's a really good question. I found this blog about it, and it gets above my pay grade in terms of chemical explanations, and every brand is different. So I've been talking with my artist friends. It would be so interesting if we could figure out what different things were in different brands and come up with a catalog, but I'm not sure that paint companies would want to share that with us.
Interesting. Yeah.
But there is a company that is making watercolors purely from soil, The Art of Soil, on Instagram right now. So I think also just having seen them do it and watching some other people online doing it, I was like, okay, I can do this. This is a thing I can figure out.
So then you make your paints from natural materials. So I guess that's a part of your process then. That's like a stage where you're going out and are you foraging for these things? Tell us about that.
Well, the foraging for the supplies is kind of just built into my daily rituals. If I'm out walking the dog and I see a bunch of oak galls laying on the side of the road, then I'm going to collect those, and I'll get on my phone and look up like, can I make dyes out of this like moss that's like fallen over here on the side of the road? I can. Oh, cool. After taking the class, the wilderness school, and finding pigments, I can now recognize when there's like clay pieces of soil. If I'm walking along the creek at my house, I can pick something up and be like, okay, this is something that I could easily collect. And I collect those and take them into my studio, and I have a mortar and pestle, like people used to grind up their flour with. I take them in and just grind them. And that is actually very like meditative because it's kind of a long process and you're doing something very simple repetitively. So I grind it into as fine a powder as I can. My husband has helped me really refine my process. He was like, you need to get those sifters like the scientists have to help like get smaller granules. So now I really just have a powder that I'm mixing in with acacia gum to make my watercolors.
What's acacia gum?
Well, it's called gum arabic in the art world. Acacia gum comes from the acacia tree. I'm going to guess it probably comes from sap, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. That's totally cool.
You forage the materials and then you use your mortar and your pestle. And then beyond that, you add liquids and...
Yeah, it depends on the particular pigment I have. So I think one thing with store-bought paints is they're all nice and they're the exact same consistency. You can squeeze them all out of the tube. With natural made paints, depending on the color I want to use, I've had to kind of like format my recipe to that. And Mary, you'll understand this as a natural dyer. Like cochineal has the most beautiful color, but I can't put it in with like a clay base. So I actually just boil the cochineal and paint directly with the dye onto my paper. I do the same with indigo, and there's geranium seed I like to use. And so those ones, I keep them purely in a liquid form because that's the easiest for me. And really, with making the paints, so much of it could get into like very complex chemistry, but I kind of operate on a sort of like surprise basis. Like, we're just going to see what color this makes. I don't keep track of all the There's like mordants and things you can use that come out as different colors, but I often just have a color I'm aiming for and it'll be somewhere in that family.
Yeah, that's like me. I always think I want to be more precise and organized and say, I'm going to remember what I'm doing here in case I really like this color. But I just constantly sabotage myself by throwing something else in or, varying from the process a little bit. So I'm kind of my own worst enemy in establishing like recipes. I guess that's just my style.
Well, it is so hard though, like slight variations in temperature or pH of the soil you have or something in the water that you didn't expect can all change the color. So I really feel like you'd have to be some sort of like PhD chemist to really get a recipe down.
You mentioned indigo. Indigo dyeing is quite another process from other kinds of textile dyeing with plants. So I'm interested in knowing how you use the indigo with paints. Do you take the plant and make a paste out of it, or do you use powders or?
Well, indigo is really powerful. I can mix that one with a powder and it like a ground like soil, and it will definitely take with the soil and make the soil blue. And so I can keep it as a liquid or make it into a paste. But every paint is different. Like cochineal, if I put it with some soil, it won't keep the same color. It's really been touch and go, but I keep a lot of jars of just like dyes really in my refrigerator in my studio. And I have a whole shelf. I would have had y'all into my studio, but it is huge and echoey and everything is concrete. And my husband was like, you really should just have a nice microphone. So yeah, I have jars of all the things I've collected and then the things I've learned I can mix in to try and experiment to make a paint stronger, like citric acid. Some things, if you put it in, it'll make the color stay and more rich. So there is a lot of trial and error, and I keep a journal to try and keep track of it. But as you said, it's very hard to replicate the exact,
Yeah. We could say that it interferes with our creative process. So I'm sure we'll get back to more recipes and plants and sort of like the nuts and bolts of this. But we'd love to hear a little more of your backstory as an artist and your evolution into where you are now.
I did live out in a very rural area of Colorado when I was little. So I remember making mud pies and playing in the dirt as a kid. And I always loved drawing and telling stories. So I think that's just evolved over the decades, I guess. I started as an art teacher, but even before that, something that was so cool and influential for me, I went to the University of Texas and I had this really amazing biology professor who was teaching a native plants course. And rather than keeping us in the classroom at the university, every week we got on a van and went to a different nature preserve or location in Central Texas and would hike around, and he would tell us about all the plants and the ecosystem. And I think at the time it was like a fun class and I enjoyed it. But what was cool is years later, how I still remember the plant scientific names and details about them and things. And I think that class really opened up my world in a much deeper and more interesting way. Then during the pandemic, I had this background with a little bit of biology, but I was kind of at home feeling helpless watching all of the news and thinking about all those social issues. I would go in my backyard and meditate every day, which brought me a lot of peace, but it also brought me to this conclusion that all of these political and social and economic issues are all hinged on the well-being of our planet. So that made me really think, okay, if there's one thing I want to put my effort into, it is really educating and working around biology. I did rewild my yard and take out all the grass and put in a ton of native plants, and some of them were growing like 6 feet high. It became such a huge, weird political deal in my neighborhood because there's an HOA. I would get love letters from people who would write me notes and put them on my car windshield and tell me how this reminded them of multiple times. It happened like 4 or 5 times at least that I got letters from people about my yard. It reminded them of their country home when they were growing up, because they would see birds and butterflies and so much life in our yard. We'd find frogs and snakes. And then the folks who are, running the HOA were very upset about it. And we, for years, still not resolved, have been going back and forth. At this point, have retargeted my energies. But one thing I learned in trying to present this to them is that scientific information isn't always going to sway somebody when they have a nostalgic or emotional connection to lawns as a sign of like buy-in and community and wealth. And so I realized I had to find a sort of my more loving and subversive way to get around this educational issue with people. And so I'm not necessarily like directly interacting with the HOA anymore at this point. We're still trying to figure that out. But it's really helped me like target and think about messaging in the educational programs I want to present around my artwork. And so, for example, get angry when I was going to walk, like, there's water running down the street and that's just wasting water. It's coming from a river. So I started thinking about how to put these into like concise educational slogans. So one of the ones that I've come up with is soil is life and Texas rivers are greater than the math sign than your lawn. And I've been also trying to sort of reincorporate some of the messaging from patriotic or like diverse communities, all different communities into this sort of like educational messaging I'm doing, like love your neighbors. And I'm illustrating images of all the insects and creatures from around Texas. And what I want to do is screen print those. I'm working on getting a grant for it, but I want to screen print those. If people bring in shirts or use materials to events, then I want to screen print those or let them screen print them with algae ink on a reused fabric. And I think that empowers them creatively and helps spread this message. And it also teaches them to upcycle things and how that can be still fashion forward or fun. So I think the question was my background and how I got here. I think a lot of it sparked from this, how do I reach these people and communicate? We've got such a polarized society. How do we reach across those sort of divides that people have built in their minds and recognize, yeah, we actually all do care and want the best, but there's like a messaging issue.
That's so interesting and like important to point out. A really good story.
Thank you.
Your yard, is it still wild? You said it's still in process with the HOA. I'm just curious.
Well, oh gosh. Yes and no. They recently tore out about like 3 feet of all the plants on every side. HOAs have a ridiculous amount of power. We actually are in the process of moving to a non-HOA neighborhood.
Oh,
wow.
Okay.
Because this has just been such a point of contention. My husband has been a saint. He is like, my friend was like, he really loves you because he keeps putting up with this when it's not even his gardening style, but he knows it's so important to you, which I think is so sweet. He's been amazing. Feel incredibly lucky and grateful.
Yeah,
for his, support.
This thing takes a certain amount of partner buy-in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does. I can speak the same. Yes. It's amazing. It's not my husband's style at all. But just the other day, he said, gosh, I walked out and there were so many birds and all this activity. And it was just so amazing. He goes, I really like this. So he affirmed it. What's going on in our yard, which is kind of a lot of.
Well, I just have to say, my husband too said a similar thing recently. He was like, I love how there's so many animals and birds in our yard, and they're all in our yard and not in I don't know. They just obviously prefer our yard. It was really sweet because we have a little plot. We're in the city, and our yard isn't that crazy. We started kind of last year around the Mary Reynolds conversation. We took out some invasive stuff and planted native stuff, and it's so crazy how much of a difference it makes.
Oh, just the smallest shift, and you can see it, you can witness it.
Yeah. There's
and
baby
I know
bunnies
that
all of a sudden and birds, and it's so fun.
And it's so reaffirming and it makes me so happy to have life.
Absolutely. I'm just swooning over your ideas. I just love so much the idea of inviting people to bring something to print with some sort of natural material with these messages, these clever messages that you've come up with as a way to, in your words, educate and sort of use art as you use the word subversive. And I love that. It's really fun that you went from the sort of lawn rebellion thing into these ideas for your art and the slogans and the education piece of it. So now that you've listened to Mary Reynolds, you said you were just listening to it. I don't know if you've listened to the whole thing, but we discussed in that interview about neighbors complaining, like they didn't like it. They were threatened by it. But your neighbors actually gave you like love letters, like they loved it.
It was very polarizing, I would say. Some people loved it and it brought them to like their childhood, and other people found it very offensive.
We've had a couple of guests on the show where we talk about the lawn thing, including Mary Reynolds, and there are others where it goes very deep. And I think you mentioned how being a symbol of status and what would you say, affluence or whatever, to be able to have a nice lawn. Somehow this messaging has just made its way into our national psyche so deeply. Homeowners associations are notoriously difficult to deal with in these situations. I mean, we heard again and again and again stories all over the place of friends of ours and a couple that's also been on this podcast twice. They lived in a little tiny townhouse with a postage stamp yard. They have 6 children and they grew like 500 pounds of food every year on this little postage stamp yard. And they were teaching others how to do it. And their homeowners association was always resisting it and said, you couldn't do this in the front yard. You can't have vegetables in the front yard. Vegetables are not pretty or something. I don't know. So I guess as social norms shift and we make these transitions, we sort of evolve as humans. You know, the people out front are never have it easy. You know, I mean, look back on history, you know.
Yeah. Have you guys heard of Terry Tempest Williams?
No.
Oh my gosh, she's an amazing environmental writer. I am a huge fangirl of her work. She's probably in her 70s at this point. She's in Utah.
I'm writing her down.
Yeah, she has this really good book. Point being, she like says that environmental grieving is one of the roadblocks for people to like moving forward into sort of a new thought process around this. And all the research really shows that too. So it's like, well, how do we help people feel these feelings of sadness or fear that they need to feel to move towards a different mindset? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And we have discussed this with our guest, Leah Rampey. She's written a whole book called Earth and Soul. It's about this to a certain extent, how the grief of it is valid. We need to feel it and accept it and then move on beyond it. And she even talks about how the grief of it and the heartbreak and the acceptance of what humans have done to the planet is a way of our hearts opening.
Yeah, I agree.
To moving forward. And I think this is what we're talking about. People are now, so many people are in a different place with this. We're on this continuum of hanging on to the status quo to just being climate change zealots and everything in between.
Yes.
So you just have to, we don't have the answers, but we sort of try to help people ride the wave.
Yeah.
And I think just find our own place of peace, I guess, within it and how we want to be and how we want to behave, what we want to put forward, what we want to demonstrate with our own behavior.
And compassion for when we don't live up to that, right? Sometimes people think I make environmental art and they'll be like very guilty about their plastics use. I'm like, look, I buy plastic bags of salad so that me and my child will have salad in the evening. I'm not like, we should be perfect. I'm just saying, like, I guess aware, present.
Always.
Yeah. We experience that a lot too. People like apologize to us and we're like, I have a question back to the paints and your creation of the paints. Do you have any specific stories or memories or anything like really fun connected to a specific like color that you created or like a piece that you created out of something that you weren't expecting? I love my mom's stories about this plant made this color and then I accidentally left it out and this thing dropped in it. And so then those are always really fun for me. So do you have any stories like that?
Well, I like mixing cochineal and indigo a lot. I think I just figured that out a couple days ago. I was painting a piece with cochineal, and this makes sense. It's color theory, but I hadn't thought it out. I was painting with cochineal on paper and then putting in little dots of indigo, but I wasn't like washing my brush out fully. And so then it started making a really beautiful like purple. And the other thing I love is ashes. I don't know. There's something so beautiful about ashes to me and the remains of things. And we had the full solar eclipse in Texas, this spring. And we got together with some of my husband's friends from like middle school and high school. His friends came and we all rented a place and we had a campfire. And at the end of the weekend, I collected the ashes and made them into, not all of them, but I made a portion of them into watercolors. I have a ton of them just ground up. I am very practical and pragmatic and down to earth. But to me, there is something still so cool about collecting the ashes from such a special event and a special time and using them in my art.
What color does it make?
Well, so if I collect the ashes on the floor of the campfire, it would be just gray. But I actually like to collect the wood that's left at the end of the campfire will be like super black and shiny. It's pure carbon, which is what all life forms are based off of. I always like to collect that and grind it up. It's so cool.
Is that biochar, Mom?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think biochar is something that's a different process to get it,
Okay.
which is beyond my ability to explain right here or at all. I think that would be charcoal, wouldn't it?
Is charcoal just pure carbon?
I don't know. It's the very black pieces left over from a fire.
Oh, I don't think I told you guys this. Because I started working with soil and all these natural pigments, I've been like, I need a scientist I can like talk to like figure out all these things. Somebody who really knows and understands all of this. And I started looking online like soil scientist, Central Texas, soil residency, soil. I found a soil scientist who's got a $500,000 grant to do urban soil research in Texas. Her name's Dr. Allison Veach, and she's going to let me come along and collaborate with her for the next 5 years. And I'm really excited because I think she's going to be able to answer a lot of these kind of questions.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Let me tell you about what it's like to drift to sleep on a 100% natural wool pillow sourced from regenerative farms, wrapped in a lovingly handmade organic cotton pillowcase. Oh wait, I can't. I think it's just something you're going to have to try for yourself. Holy Lamb Organics is proud to carry on a centuries-old tradition of making beautiful textile products by hand. Combining heritage methods with pristine natural and organic materials and sustainable business practices, they bring a dedication to healthy living and the environment. Everything Holy Lamb does reflects their devotion to the planet and its inhabitants. From their supply chain to their manufacturing processes to their facilities management, nothing happens without considering the environmental impact. Most importantly, they're also dedicated to fair labor practices, secure working conditions, diversity, and inclusion. From the farm to the mill to their partner manufacturers, everyone shares the same high ideals of a safe, respectful workplace and environmentally conscious methods. Making good products enables them to do good work. Every time we order something from Holy Lamb Organics, we're proud to support a small town, made in America company. You can find Holy Lamb Organics in the Lady Farmer Marketplace. For additional marketplace discounts, you can join the Almanac, our member-supported community platform. Find Holy Lamb Organics products including pillows, sheets, natural wool comforters, and more in the bedding section of the Lady Farmer Marketplace at www.ladyfarmer.com.
So talk a little bit about this using the soil. Do you just go out and pick up some dirt and mix it in and see what happens?
Well, so like you said earlier, the little girl was like drawing with the soil and showing you the different colors. Soil is all different colors. If you start looking at it when you go around, there's yellow soil in some places and bright red soil in others and pink soil. And from creek beds, you can sometimes get like a greenish soil. Usually I just use directly the soil. And I like that in a sense because it's like bringing you closer to the land in many ways and appreciating its beauty. I like the idea that maybe people can feel a little more connected to the land through what I'm making. And we know what happens to the piece after. Right now, all the things painted with acrylic, like what's going to happen to them? That takes forever to biodegrade. But like if I'm just painting with soil, that can just go back to the earth.
So for you, do you specifically seek out like those different colored soils and collect them and sort of keep them separated? Is that part of your process?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes. I started talking to another soil scientist who told me there's like a whole soil chart and like, they keep track of all the different soil colors through numbers, but I've never gotten deep enough into it yet at this point to go like track them down specifically, but I'm always just looking at the soil when I go somewhere, like, what is this color?
I really appreciate that you bring up your sensitivity to what becomes of these things way down the road. And since modern times, art supplies do have a lot of synthetics in them, just because everything does. So, as an artist, how do you feel about that? I mean, you've already said that you think about it. And so, your soil paints, that that's going to return to the earth. But there's so much art and artwork out there, and including children making artwork. And it brings up a lot of questions. And I'm certainly not knocking artists or saying people shouldn't make things out of synthetic materials. I'm just saying it's something to think about. And when I walk into a place that's selling things for your wall, artwork, paints, different things. And to my knowledge, these things aren't necessarily sentimental, or I don't know.
I think I do feel sad about where we're at with the production of so many of these supplies, because I think of artists, and this is definitely a stereotype because not all artists are the same, but I do think of artists as maybe having a more spiritual line of work, and to me, it feels sad to think that some of that's just being produced with things that maybe aren't so great for us overall. And at that time, I know many beautiful and amazing artists who are using these paints, and it is something they mull over and think about, but also is there a better product? There's starting to be natural acrylics and things. I haven't tried them. So I think there is a sense of sadness more than anything. I just want us to talk about it so that everybody can be informed. I was having a conversation with an artist recently who was like, well, I love my plastics. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, as long as you know and you're making a conscious decision.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because it's almost something I feel hesitant to even mention.
I think it brings up shame for people because nobody wants to be producing a bunch of junk, yet we all are on our everyday lives. I mean, I think about it when I go get a coffee. If they put a lid on it, I'm like, oh God, that's another thing in the environment.
Yeah, but the thing is, they have a whole stack of those lids behind the counter anyway. There's such a...
We're going to try our best, and we're not going to be perfect, but at least we're educated and trying, and what more can you ask for?
Oh, absolutely. And we say this all the time. We can't be perfect. We can't reject all these things. But you said it so perfectly that I think the important thing is to be able to talk about it, and have compassion and understanding for ourselves. I don't know if people believe me or us when we say we really, really don't want to come from a place of judgment. You shouldn't use these materials. You shouldn't get coffee to go. You shouldn't use plastic wrap. We don't want to sound like that at all. And we make a great effort, I think, to present it as we just really want everybody to know and understand. And
I like that about y'all's energy.
Thank you. I hope we're successful in making people feel okay about what they've decided to do. But we do want people to know stuff. We do want you to know that plastic recycling is really mostly a joke. It's really not for real. And let's all think together and talk about it. Try to come up with alternatives and do the best we can. But in the meantime, life is life. And we've all got a lot to do. And there's no room for judging ourselves or others for things. We just have to do our best.
And I think most importantly is skepticism around anyone or anything that's telling you that buying this thing or using this thing is the best option or the better option or better for the environment or better for you, because it might be in one way. But I think the most important thing is that people know how to think and understand the system and understand their own impact. I don't know, using a plastic to-go cup might be a better option than some strange corn compost thing that will never be composted. Maybe it takes a lot more energy to create or something. I don't know. I'm just making this up. But at any time we're led to think this is what you should do because it's better, I think we just have to always be skeptical of that and think with our brains.
I think what I enjoy doing personally is exploring options and talking about them. And some things work and some things don't. Like for Emma's wedding last year, we set out to compost all the food from the weekend. And it was really an adventure, talking to the different caterers and the different providers and what we were trying to do. And for many of them that was like, oh, we don't have any way to do that, but that's a good idea. Let's talk about it. Maybe we can work something out. And it worked out really pretty well. It worked out very well, in fact. We ended up throwing away way less than if we had just totally said, oh, well, this is not the way things are done. And, we're just going to do it the normal way.
And you planted the seeds with all the people who are like,
Right. And some of those stories have come back to us. There's someone in our community that now teaches school down that way, and she teaches in an outdoor education environment, and they have contacted and worked with the composting company that we worked with, and it just because it happened to be in the same part of Virginia. And so that was really cool. We we made that connection for those
Yeah.
people. So you're so right, Heidi. It's really feeling comfortable out talking about these things and not being afraid of that people are going to feel alienated or shamed or scolded or whatever. So
I think we're also grappling with the shift from the emphasis on individual responsibility. And I think that the more people understand that there's only so much that we are actually responsible for as individuals, because we are sort of at the mercy of what is made available to us as far as information and just general what is made available to us as far as products and how we get those products. I think that a lot of it actually isn't individual responsibility. Our responsibility just comes down to being as educated as possible and as open as possible to everything. And I think that's tricky because for so long it's been like, do your part, don't eat meat, or whatever it is that you think is doing your part.
oh, such a good point, Emma. And circling back to the art supplies thing, if you are an artist, what are you supposed to do if this supply you need and use for your living, for your art, for what you do is something that's not environmentally ideal? What are you supposed to do?
I think these conversations are the most important thing, though, right? Because artists are talking about this online, and there are companies that are like coming up with solutions for these. So, yeah, I just think the talking to each other.
Ask questions, talk to people.
Yes.
I know in the day of the internet, that's like, we've grown up. Well, I didn't always have the internet, but it's interesting. A lot of our public discourse has all moved online, but like maybe we'd be better off if it wasn't.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
there of artists that is into making their own paints like this in this way?
Yeah, definitely. I'm part of a collective out of Santa Fe called Eco Artists, and they're into all the different things eco related. They just came and did a show in Austin this spring. There's the woman who organizes us, Patricia. She's always sharing really interesting things. They're having a retreat in Santa Fe with, as far as I know, this person was one of the original, like, going out and getting pigments people. I don't know their name, but their online alias is Pigment Hunter. And I think they were one of the first people I saw who was out there, like, collecting soil samples, in the creek near their house and things.
I'm wondering how much overlap there is with the textile dyeing. I had never thought about exploring the pigments in soil. Never thought about just
Wonder if those would dye things. When you see like a really deep red soil, it's because it had iron that got rusted at some point. So it makes me wonder if you like things. So theoretically,
well, yeah. The orange also, I think, associate with a lot of clay. And I know we're very, very clay heavy here. So heck, I might just trying a dye pot out of some nice clay soil and see what
Yeah.
happens,
So, Heidi, what does slow living mean to you?
well, I think slow living is a general change in the pace of our lives. And I am probably a person who tends to go too fast a lot of the time. It's a lot of work for me to slow down and really embody where I'm at and my feelings and that sort of thing. I think, though, with my creative process, I think kind of represents that for me because I'm out collecting, soil and processing the soil and provides this space to have a more intimate relationship with my process and my materials. And so I think slow living is about sort of an intimacy in a lot of ways, right? When I slow down, I can connect with you guys a lot better than when I'm rushing through life. And when I slow down, I can really take time to kind of like have a more intimate understanding of my land or my processes and things like that.
I love that word that you used. It is an intimacy. It's sort of an intimacy with not only your land and surroundings, but kind of like being with the moment. What's happening right then. That's a beautiful description. Thank you so much. You're the first one that said that.
Oh, wow.
I love it. This is going to sound kind of redundant within this conversation, but what does the good dirt mean to you? I mean, we've been talking so much about dirt and the pigments and the time you spend with it and all of that, but still curious as to how you answer that question.
Well, I think, kids these days a lot. My daughter's friends were all sharing their like screen time amounts, and one of the girls had 60 hours on YouTube the first week and the other kids told her like touch grass. That's one of their things the kids in this day and age say to each other if they're like, out of touch with what's happening, and I'm trying to build that awareness with my daughter. If she doesn't get outside, or if I don't get outside, we can get kind of like depressed. And we got out one day when she was grumpy and we started gardening and she was like, I forgot how much I just love putting my hands and feet in the soil, and her mood changed so drastically in that short period. And it got me sort of like in my excited teacher mode of like, you're touching everything in existence when you're out here gardening. Everything that has ever existed on this planet literally is in this dirt. And so it's kind of like this huge connector of us to our ancestors and all of history and all of the plants and everything else. I guess, the thing I said I want to put on my t-shirt, soil equals life,
Yes.
I think would be the good dirt.
That's so fun. I love that story about the touch grass. I feel like I've also seen that recently. Is it like a TikTok thing or something? I don't know. It's like a thing that the kids are saying.
Yeah.
That's so funny to like bring someone down to earth. Like, come on, touch grass. Like
yeah.
that.
Well, it's a weird world they're growing up in that I see for my daughter. This is off the topic, but every family has different policies around technology and things. I have an education background, so I'm very like conscientious of, brain development and things. And so I've always been pretty stringent, probably more strict than most parents. And I get a lot of grief from my daughter about that. But the touch grass thing, I think she and her friends are starting to see like, okay, yeah, it's not good for people when they're not connected to the world.
Also, it's really hard because it kind of has to be a cultural thing. I see it both ways. I mean, it's also really hard for a kid who isn't allowed to plug in socially in the ways that everyone else is. My friend who was just visiting, and she's a little one, so she's thinking about it, but she's also like a middle school teacher. She was remarking that like it's actually so much easier for a child who isn't allowed the same kind of like screen permissions as maybe their friend group or their school friends, if they have like at least one other kid who also isn't allowed it. Like it just doesn't take that much of like more than one person being like, let's not do this.
Yeah.
Let's just like have different rules. But it's really, really hard if you're the only person, which I think like that can't be like that hard. Like can we just collectively
Maybe
just touch grass more?
Yes, yes. Maybe that should be one of the shirts, touch grass.
Yeah.
the
I think
kids
it
would
should.
buy it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Couple of things. Maybe there could be like co-op, is co-op the word, or groups or cohorts or something of parents that get together that, have similar rules around that so that their kids can be like a kind of a community at least. I don't know. Or does that
I
happen
think
naturally or
are
not?
drawn to each other
Okay.
Yeah.
in that way. There's a good portion of the kids in my daughter's social group who, you always hear about teens like checking their text messages, and she does, but they don't really do that. They like to get together and play D&D or things like that. And I think camps, like the kind of old school camps where there's no technology, are helpful so that you can find those places. They're still there. And I think in some ways they're growing as we like learn about.
And it's cool that they actually like appreciate it. Like she probably likes being at no tech camp.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard directly from her? How is it feeling to her?
I mean, she loves this. This is her 4th year going to this camp. And I
Okay.
teach retreats out in the hill country where all the camps are that are all kind of like slow living based. So she's kind of grown up going out to that area for many reasons. She loves it. There's never a doubt when I asked her, do you want to go do this year? She's like, yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then she'll get back home, and then she and her friends all plan to go to like a Girl Scout camp for a week that's all outdoors too. So yeah, I think she loves it. She's driving this. I don't want to pick things for her. I want to let her like discover. So yeah, she keeps being involved in these things. So I think she really enjoys it.
Maybe this age group is going to be the pivot, if they've adopted the slogan touch grass, and there's something going on there, there's a light bulb going off. And it's interesting to know that they were even noting their screen time, like that's they're conscious of that. That's cool too.
It is interesting. There are a lot of cool conversations happening with them that I'm sort of like privy to. Some of the kids get very anxious and with the social media and stuff. One of the kids recently was like, I need my phone or I'm going to be anxious. And my daughter was like, actually, you probably need your phone less if you're feeling anxious.
Wow. Smart cookie. She's got a good mom.
I try.
This is really a fun conversation. I've really enjoyed all the different places we've gone with it. And I'm probably going to go out and dig up some dirt and see if it
And touch grass. I love that.
and
I'm gonna
touch
say that all the
grass
time now.
and see if I can get some color on a bandana or something from just the soil. Maybe
That could be y'all's podcast slogan, touch of dirt.
yeah.
Love it.
Okay.
Heidi, before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to leave with the audience, or is there something that you want people to most understand about the work that you do?
Let's see. Well, I think the self-compassion part is really important to me, but also this like idea of deactivating climate doom, where and I do it too, where we feel powerless. I'm a big fan of that theory of the butterfly effect, where one little butterfly wing flap can be the tipping point for like a weather pattern or something changing. And I just think I'd like us to revisit that messaging of like, oh, well, I won't make a difference, to something along the lines of I matter. Because I think when we say I won't make a difference, we're saying like, well, I don't matter. But I think if we can all take away I matter, then maybe we can all act from our highest self, I guess.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that makes a lot of sense to me.
You guys.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for
I love that y'all are doing this.
Oh,
It's so fun. Like,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Can you tell us where people can find you and follow you?
oh, yes. So, well, my website is www.heidilowell.art. Instagram handle is the same. Yep, I think that's.
Can people order stuff from you? Do you sell stuff online, or?
I do, and I have, speaking of art practices that were like, about, I have a store with Minted where they sell prints of my work too. So
cool.
all that's on my website. Yeah.
Great.
And you have a
So
make
fun.
your paint course. I guess that's an in-person thing, I noticed.
That is in person, but I'm like collaborating with, I recently had a show in Philadelphia, and I was like, if I'm going to fly up there and go to this gallery, I also want to figure out other things. I'm starting to make kits and putting together like an online thing for this woman, Cassie, at the Craft Coven in Philadelphia, is kind of encouraging me to do that. So I'm working on it slowly.
Very cool. Thank you so much. This has been so fun, and we can't wait to see more from you soon.
Thanks, you guys.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.